In this second Sunday from the Proms, death. Faced, feared, transcended, and even celebrated in what for me is one of the highlights of the whole Proms season. Ahead of us, a danse macabre, a requiem for peace, and a cello concerto that pits a solo cello against the might of the full orchestra, a work composed at the heart of one of the century's most seismic political struggles. The concert climaxes with the world premiere of Thomas Addis's Totentanz, Dance of Death, a piece specially commissioned for this year's Proms and that the brilliant composer himself will conduct at the Royal Albert Hall with the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Before that, two dark, dazzling, dramatic pieces close to Addis's heart by two composers who share a centenary this year, Witold Lutosławski's Cello Concerto and Benjamin Britten's Sinfonia da Requiem. Thomas Addis joins me here at the appropriately atmospheric Highgate Cemetery to talk about all of the music on his programme, starting with Benjamin Britten's wartime plea for peace.
Well, it's powerfully a wartime piece, Sinfonia da Requiem. It's about death, it's about just violent death, which of course when he wrote it was around in a terrible way.
In 1939, 1940.
Yes, and of course, the second movement is Totentanz, is a dance of death in itself, and is particularly vivid. Here towards the end of it, it really is as though the canvas of the piece is being torn apart. The whole orchestra in unison, and it's really a kind of very violent piece of Britain.
I mean, do you feel the force of meaning in this music, that it's a cry about peace, a cry for pacifism, a cry against war?
I always think that when you hear things like the saxophone solos in the piece, it reminds me very much of the sort of work that in painting Francis Bacon was doing at the time, and these sort of wraith-like figures, and it has its extraordinary expressive power, at once fragility and violence, and the two extremes.
Was a young guy of 26, 27, of strong political pacifist convictions. Does that mean, is that one reason why you think that this is, if not the most, then among the most direct orchestral music that Britain ever wrote?
Yes, it's incredibly precocious and thrilling. Of course, war is a subject that he returned to many times in the course of his life, but there's something, I think to me, I can tell that this has sprung very freshly from his pen, and it's really inspired, and also brilliant control of the music. I mean, it's not a mess. It's an extremely concise piece, actually.
How does it feel to conduct this piece? Is it a piece that works well when you're up there giving it to the orchestra, making it work with an orchestra?
Oh, well, it's quite masterly the way it's constructed, put together, and it's a pleasure to hear the amazing structures that he's made become real in under one's hands.
Benjamin Britten's Sinfonia da Requiem at the Proms. Thomas Adès conducted the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Thomas Adès is with me in Highgate Cemetery. Look, the next piece we're going to hear is by another composer who was born in 1913 and who in fact wrote music for Benjamin Britten's partner, Peter Pears. This piece, though, is Witold Lutosławski's Polish composer's cello concerto that he wrote in 1970 for the Russian cellist Mstislav Rostropovich. Look, Tom, this piece seems to be about an individual, sometimes a rather fragile individual, against an often very violent mass.
I think it's clearly an opposition that's in the piece. The opening solo is very long, and it does feel like hearing somebody's thoughts. And it starts with a heartbeat or a breath or just this rhythm, and it seems to be quite skittish and sort of capricious, and will go anywhere it wants. The orchestra, Lutosławski describes it as being invited to join in by the cellist, and it is actually linked to what he's just played, but it really is hard to hear it as anything other than an interruption. 4
sections in the piece. It starts with that repeated D in the cello, yes. Which is marked, the most amazing marking is indifferente, yes. Indifferently. So the cellist is almost asked to play, I don't mean bored, but asked to play indifferently.
Yes, it's not supposed to be a thought about, it's just something that happens like a breath or walking, I think. I think that's fairly clear. Yeah.
But there's then there's a song, a cantilena in the piece.
Yes, there's a brilliant slow movement, wonderful. And then there's a tremendous section where the cello is pitted against the full orchestra and it unleashes its full impact. And a wonderful part that I like to think of as the ghost train, where he just plays and plays, and I have to catch various cues and point to people who almost pop out like skeletons out of like in a ghost train, sort of try to stop him, and they can't stop him, and there's this sort of, finally, there's this tremendous sort of guillotine-like repeated 10 times chord, which does actually finish that off, that section. It's very powerful.
Is it a piece you've learned from as a composer?
I actually was very lucky. When I was at Guildhall School of Music, I must be about 17, and Lutosławski came and conducted as an invited composer. He conducted the cello concerto with Louise Hopkins playing the cello, and I played the orchestral piano part, and that's when I first heard the piece, and of course it was, I completely fell in love with it.
Here is Witold Lutosławski's cello concerto at the Proms. Have a look on Twitter for Lutosławski's own guide to the concerto from a letter he wrote to the work's dedicatee, Mstislav Rostropovich, live on Twitter at BBC Proms, #Lutosławski. Paul Watkins, the cello soloist, and Thomas Adès conducts the BBC Symphony Orchestra.
Thank you.